I'm going to bring up more questions from you than I have answers to, and that's good. It means you're thinking. You have some resources now to look up your own answers, but I'll be able to take a couple questions here and there. We, once again, put a lot of information together to try and get through. So rinse water collection right here. Let's say this is hazardous waste. Let's say it meets the criteria because it's hazardous. It's some type of acid going over here, acidic waste. Who thinks the POG would be in the tank? Okay, when it enters the pipe prior to the tank. Anyone? Okay, a couple. When it's taken out of the tank. All right, we got a few. Or D, come on. You got to know that's the right answer, right? So we'll go through some of the different scenarios and you can come to your own conclusions. All right, back to the fundamental questions. Here's where it really matters because point of generation, we have a point of generation, but it might not be subject to regulation until later, as you'll see. All right, here's scenario one. I've showed this slide every year. And sorry about those arrows. They're pointing to an acid coming out of a process on the left and a basic material coming out on the right. They mix in the pipe. They transfer the liquid. When it's no longer useful, that should be a key for you. Where are the points of generation? It's non-hazardous, so you can see by this, it's mixing in the pipe, neutralizing, and now it's non-hazardous. So where would the point of generation be? Could it be there? Well, let's see what we found out from our sources. Individually piped to a collecting pipe, they neutralize each other, resulting as non-hazardous. Is there a point of generation? And yes, each of those corrosive wastes upstream of the collecting pipe. All right. I think I took some flack for this last year. Let's see if I fixed it up right. Process tank outflow. So you got a process tank. This is some type of manufacturing process. Then they decide we don't need that wastewater anymore, or we don't need that material. We're going to send it over to the waste settling tank. You get a sludge. You send the sludge over to a heated drying tank, and the water goes to the sewer. How many points of generation do we see here? I hear 2, 3, 4. A couple 4s. All right. And this arrow should actually be, the point of generation is probably, in this case, when they decide they no longer need it, they're going to discard it, but it's not going to be subject to regulation until here. We'll hit more on that in a little bit here. You have this tank. You're developing a new sludge here. You're separating out an aqueous phase. So here you go. You got this sludge. You've got a new water. And here, after you remove every bit of water, you have a new dried sludge, more concentrated. Different POGs, which are going to matter different for land disposal restriction purposes, possibly for treatment permitting purposes. But really, I think we're trying to just show that when you have a new waste, or you've changed the characteristics of that waste, you have a new point of generation. Yes?
That it's a point of generation. Are you talking about when it becomes a hazardous waste or when it becomes?
My mic. All right, here we go. Oh, I see. All right. So the question that he's asking is, the point of generation, is it when it's a hazardous waste or when it's, is it a waste or when it's a hazardous waste? And the point of generation guidance that EPA put together was basically saying that you have, if you have a waste and it meets that hazardous listing or characteristic, then you have a point of generation at that point. And we'll see later here that that doesn't always mean that it's subject to regulation right at that point. So while we have a point of generation within a vessel, it's going to be subject to regulation later. So here are some plating tanks. These are from Orange County. Oh, sorry.
Can we go back to the other slide?
Yeah.
If that light blue where the waste settling tank
Okay.
is process valuable chemical and not water, does that change things?
You would no longer have a waste. So you would not have a point of generation of a waste. When
Red sludge would still be a waste.
correct. Here they decided to discharge it to the sewer. So by discarding it, they made it a waste.
Okay, so if I recover the light blue, how many points of generation do I have? Does that top one out of the process tank go away?
If you recover this, is that going to be a waste? That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't see that first one as a point of generation at all because it's not a waste at the bottom of the second one.
So this is from a,
Can't use that anymore.
let's say it's a process that's a spent material. They can't use it anymore for their process without changing the characteristics of that. So they must reclaim it in some way. It's going to be a waste under the chart. So it's a secondary, as a secondary material, you can recycle it or use it. It's still going to be a waste by the definitions, but you can fall out of the definition of waste by reusing it in your process. Now it gets more complicated than that if you have totally enclosed treatment units and other types of vessels. And point of generation, today I'm trying to hit it in way too short a time. It's a whole chapter in the McCoy's book, and it could be more than 8 hours. Appreciate good feedback, good questions, and what I'd like to do is compile some of those. If you could put those in your questions and comments, I have everyone's email that registered for the course, and I can send out information after getting clarification on some of these issues. I wanted to show you a plating tank from Orange County. Terry Carrier showed me this. They were trying to sell these at an auction, and no one would buy them as is. I wonder why. So, is it a waste? So much for making you think here. So, while it's being used for manufacturing, there is a point of generation exclusion in this section of regulations. Federally, California adopted that and put it in California. So we'll cover that in just a minute. So looking at those plating tanks, they're probably the waste in a plating tank is going to meet some type of listing or characteristic generally. So when it exits a process tank, it would meet the definition of hazardous waste, unless it's going to be reused in a process again. All right. Problem here is some materials, if they stop using their process and don't use it and they just accumulate it speculatively, they're going to get captured under the definition of waste even if they have a material that they call usable. And there's been several enforcement actions, and some people agree or disagree with that logic, but we'll show you more on that in a bit here. So this is a tank that had not been used in a long time, just sitting there. And the question came up, can a process tank be regulated as a hazardous waste tank? And the answer is coming. This is another tank, same shop, chrome barrel plating bath. I think it had sat unused for 2 years. Do you remember? Yeah, it'd been a very, very long time. So here is our point of generation and process tank, the exclusion in Title 22. So it's exempt if it's generated in the product or raw material storage tank, vessel or vehicle, pipeline, manufacturing process unit, or associated non-waste treatment manufacturing unit. So this comes, if it's from a manufacturing process, it's exempt within there until it either exits the unit or remains in that unit for more than 90 days if it's non-operational. Now, how you define non-operational, not no one, but there's been several people disagree on what non-operational is. You'll have to decide that through your agency. This is one of our sites. I think it was a military facility, but it may not be. The inspector for that area said, hey, look, we've got the silver cyanide. They had a process. It's in this tank. It's a material. They haven't used it in over a year. What do they need to do with it? Do they need to manage it, actively manage it, or can they just leave it there forever? And what do you guys think? Can you just leave a material that you're not going to use there forever? No, I think it's pretty clear from the manufacturing process unit there that if it remains in there, it hasn't been used, not going to be used, you have 90 days. Within 90 days, it's a waste. Now, once you take it out, now that just says you got to take it out and put it in a container and manage it. It still could be a recyclable material. It still could meet a lot of other exemptions or uses later on. But you just need to have some type of management in place to protect the environment here. This is one of my sites. This tank was it's a zinc galvanizing facility. This is actually wood with metal over it. And this crud in here was pretty nasty looking. So I had to ask some questions. What's in the tank? In this case, he said it was acid residue with heavy metals. It says it was used for stripping metal parts. Is it hazardous? And this is my business. The red is what my business said. Yeah, it's acidic. It has lead and zinc. Listed waste, maybe. Depends on its process there. So, last used in '94. Will you use it again? No. I mean, clearly you couldn't use this thing again. So is that a waste? It's easy there. It was a waste a long time ago. There's a RCRA online dedicated to what I've just been talking about, the 90 days after the unit ceases to be operated for manufacturing. So there you go. All right. Boy, this is the hardest section of our training today. Hazardous sludge forms an impoundment. Is a point of generation when the sludge forms or when the sludge is removed from the impoundment for disposal. So I think I take this question to mean we send a bunch of stuff over to an impoundment, say it's an aqueous waste. Now you settle out some hazardous stuff in the bottom. So now you've got something hazardous sitting in the bottom of like a surface impoundment. So is it when the sludge is removed or when the sludge forms? It's the POG. And here's what EPA said. The moment of their deposition at the bottom of the unit. When lateral, what? Condition, temporary cessation of lateral particle movement. Big words. So they're saying, look, you've got a POG here. Question real quick? Oh, okay. All right. Throwing that out there. We don't have surface impoundments. I don't know if DTSC even has any surface impoundment facilities around anymore. All right. Filter press. This is for waste treatment processing, right? That's its only purpose. And this thing is only to collect waste. So where is the POG for filter press waste? Is it, who thinks it's there? I say a couple now. Who thinks it's down here? All right. That's why I broke the slide up on where is it subject to regulation. So here you go. Here, you already had a wastewater coming in. It was already a waste. Now you've concentrated enough to the point it's hazardous. So you have a point of generation. So we're saying, well, just for ease, we're saying it was non-haz coming in. It could have been haz. Pressing out the liquid. Now you've concentrated it. You have a POG there, but subject to regulation here. Agree? Moving on, more on that later. We could discuss this. Somehow at our tag meetings, we can talk about stuff like this for like an hour or more, sadly, and still come up with a wrong answer. So this is the best I can do. Please, later on, if you figure out something that I don't know, please enlighten me. A little bit of a recap on some points of generation within tanks.
I'm sorry, can we go back? So was that initial, when it's going in, it's already a waste? You had a question mark by the POG, so I'm not sure what the answer was there.
So if I didn't make it clear enough earlier, as I don't presume to have all the answers for you. I am providing you valuable resources to search your own answers. That's the best I could come up with, though.
Is this waste going in?
Yeah, waste going in. Question.
So that's a treatment unit.
Right.
So, well, yes, yeah, okay, so yes, if that's a treatment unit. And yes, because he is changing the characteristic, the water's coming in, he's removing the water, now he's making a sludge. It is a treatment unit, but in this case, I tricked you all. Made it non-haz coming in. So it's not a regulated treatment unit under our scheme, because they took something non-hazardous, made it hazardous. Now they have to manage it. So if this is a tank, they might have to meet tank standards there. But since they treated non-hazardous waste, they wouldn't require like a tiered permit, if that's what you're asking. Okay. All right, so I was trying to just do a recap. I heard a good trainer will recap the highlights, but I'm not exactly there yet. All right, so if they remove it for offsite disposal or discard it, it's a waste. Chemicals in the tank or the container. If it remains in non-operational equipment more than 90 days, it's going to be a waste. If they send it through an on-site recycling process, it is still defined as a waste. But if you meet all the conditions, you can be excluded from classification as a waste. So you have less management standards in place. Okay. So then there's also this RCRA online guidance that says process tank exit begins a hazardous waste tank system. So the point of exit from the process is the introductory point for hazardous waste in a tank system. John's giving me the watch signal here, so I'll try and pick it up. I can clarify more later, but again, we come up with these pictures at the tag and we share them together and we're like, wait a minute, here's this wastewater recycling unit. They're doing all this great recycling. It's hazardous coming in. They process it. They use the water again. Is it a waste? Is it subject to tank standards? And your slides, if you look at the one I gave you before, I've modified it. If they're recycling and they're claiming this, then you'll have to meet tank standards because all generator standards apply if you're treating on site under that exclusion. If you're treating on site under another exclusion for a totally enclosed treatment process, it's never, you don't even have to comply with all those requirements. That's a whole different exclusion and regulation in 261.4. I'm losing it. All right, moving on. Trying to show off my knowledge of the regulations. Here I go. Embarrass myself. Pardon me. Okay, so some container issues that we've identified, and people go back and forth. We have, if you can't identify the point of generation, you can't tell your business, or you can't enforce the compliance requirements for your business. So there's some weird ones that come up, and it's like, wait, is it there or there? Where's the point of generation? Resins are a weird one. Compressed gases, solvent. This is one of my sites. I went out and inspected. I can't tell you any information about the site because some issues are still unresolved, but they store a load of compressed gases. They get them back from various places for management. Some of it gets reused, some of them get sent off for waste management. Some of them are labeled hazardous waste, some are labeled excluded recyclable material. The condition you can see flaking off. It's so rusted, they're flaking off. There's the creek that goes right in the San Diego Bay. So there's a bunch, those are all acetylene, and some of them, most of them haven't been used in 10 years. These are various flammables and calibration gases that have been, the containers have been popped, and they're sent for scrap metal recycling. From the risk side, we're like, looked at it and said, this is definitely has some risk involved. Fitting it into the regulations has proved difficult. So let's see if we can address what I do know now. Sorry, in the back.
On the picture on the lower right-hand corner, you have a problem with storing them horizontally? That was not part of your problem.
Is it a problem storing horizontally? You're talking about this picture right here? So these are all about this big in size, and they've already been popped. In that picture, this business decided that they determined on their own that these were all empty and not subject to management standards. They popped them all and they put them in that container just for scrap metal. Not that I agree with their approach, but that's just what they decided. So back to our questions here. Is it a solid waste, which would be a solid, a liquid, or contained gaseous material? And I think in a lot of cases, there is contained gaseous material in there. So if it's surplus material, is it a waste? This is a whole new term. You might have to look it up. Surplus material is not a waste. Retrograde material. That's usually something that due to passage of time has lost its effectiveness, but it still can be reused. No, it's not if it meets certain conditions, but it could get captured later on. Oh, didn't ask you. Pretty clear, right? If they burn or vent waste, compressed gases that are contained, would that have been a waste? We think we have waste? Yes? Okay. But if the container was empty and they burned or vented it, then it would not have been subject to our regulation because it would have been empty. And approaching atmospheric pressure, I haven't seen it really clarified anywhere. It's kind of a loose term, and it might be better left that way, or maybe it needs clarification. I don't know. Hazardous. So some of the gases, compressed gases we've seen and found out that there may be at these off-site locations or even generator locations. Toxicity characteristic for ammonia would be toxic, ethylene oxide, chlorine, arsine, and then you can see all the listed gases below. Hopefully you don't see them too often. But some of these are in the calibration gas mixtures. Some of these toxic gases are in calibration gas mixtures that we use like on our emergency response equipment to calibrate things. But they're in very, very small quantities, so they may be below the characteristics or may not be listed because Nick will tell you why things meet a listing description or not. Flammables, here's what I found going through my site with all these compressed gases. Acetylene, even after the acetylene's gone, you still have acetone and like a fibrous or concrete core structure in there to keep the acetylene stable. So you might have acetone left in there. And then some of the older cylinders contain asbestos. So they pose their own issues for compressed gases. Ignitable compressed gas, I learned that from either my McCoy's or from a EPA guidance document, but they actually have something that they call ignitable compressed gas and what would meet the requirements based on DOT. So this, it may have been from an email I got working with DTSC on the issue in San Diego, but normally gaseous state, compressed inside the storage cylinder, it could be liquid and gas under pressure. And since our law here says it contain gases, meet the definition of solid waste, when they're discarded, could be subject to our regulations. All right, so 2 scenarios here. See if we can figure out the POG, if there is a point of generation. Old propane cylinder is a third full, sent back to the supplier for a new cylinder. Supplier captures the gas, qualifies the cylinder, and refills the reusable container with propane. Is it a waste? Where's the point of generation? Anyone think? Okay. All right. I think everyone's nodding correctly here. I'll show you the answer on the next slide. Now here's a different scenario. Disposable cylinders with that propane or other acetylene or calibration gases, they are not empty. Sends them to a facility that vents the gases to recycle the metal. Is that a waste? Okay, good. All right. I think we're going to find the first one. You would call it surplus material, possibly. There'd be one designation that could be given to propane that you capture and then reinsert back into your container. And then on your other one, the decision was made to discard the unwanted contained gas. And that could be at the generator location, not just the facilities that take these containers back. Here is an old interpretation on surplus propane that we got. This is the latest and maybe not the greatest, but this is what we're going off of. They're looking at the issue again to make sure that they got it right, or if we can apply this logic to other types of compressed gases. So right now, they're saying that these cylinders are not waste if they're surplus material. And I didn't provide the link on there. I think if you type in that on that DTSC Hazardous Waste Recycling Letter site, you should be able to come up with that letter. Federally, this was the only RCRA online I could find, and it's really not the same. But liquids or contained gases removed from oxygen breathing apparatus may be subject to regulation if they're listed or exhibit a characteristic. Oh, there you go. The feds have something. All right. Moving on to two-part epoxies. Unused product, two-part. Who thinks unused product no longer usable is a waste? Everyone? Just nod for me. All right. I think so. Mixed resins, they're in use. I see a lot of no's. Okay. Excess resin after use. So they have this excess. Yeah, this is where it gets really complicated. So if it's not in a process, contain and label it. I just put here, what if so they have this excess resin, they say, okay, it's a waste, I don't need it anymore. They put it in a container, label it up, pending waste determination. 90 days or 9 days or 9 hours later, they come back and it's no longer hazardous now because it's dried out or kicked off any VOCs. Maybe they could, by the time they do their waste determination, it's not even hazardous. All right, this is one of my sites that they had a bad reaction going on. Someone made it worse by throwing water in the container to try and cool it down. I came out a few hours later, and this is my heat spy. This is like 104 degrees. But these resins can be very flammable, toxics, and it's important. This shop I went into, it's really neat. They make these things. There they go. But I didn't want to be in there very long. I don't know how people work in this environment, smelling the vapors that they work with and some of these manufacturing processes. The fire marshal for this city called me out, and I did some monitoring, and I calibrated for the VOC we were looking for on my PID, and I was below the allowable OSHA limit. I couldn't believe it. It was so nauseating. But yeah, it's an interesting process. They put resins in here, they form these molds, it squeezes out on the floor. Sometimes they can capture it in the bucket. Yeah, so when it's no longer useful, it's a spent material destined for disposal. All right, POG. Where is it? Is it in the bucket? They're capturing it for waste management in the bucket. I'll say yes. Would you call POG the collection container after, way downstream? Normally, we wouldn't call that the point of generation. I've heard other agencies find creative ways to make that the POG. The point of generation be when it oozes off the part or when it's on the floor. And I think yes, and yeah, you could go various ways with this one. This is really where, when it's coming out of the manufacturing process, it's where it's a waste. So the floor, in this case, serves as adequate containment for environmental controls. Probably could meet some type of containment standard. However, within minutes or hours it's dried up to non-hazardous. So we talked this at the TAG meeting, when is it treatment? And this is what we came up with in San Diego, that treatment of resins, if you have additional materials and you're adding to that to harden it up or cure it for disposal, treatment. If you mixed your stuff, you use it in a process, it continues to harden, now it's no longer treatment. If you attended the satellite and laboratory accumulation class, you may have seen this in there. This is a common process. Process equipment. Waste captured in here. I don't know what type of equipment. It's usually solvent type waste. It's all interconnected. Who here thinks that the manufacturing unit exemption should apply to this? Everyone? No? Would you call this container the point of generation in this container, or when it leaves the process equipment? When it leaves the process equipment? So this is a manufacturing process unit, and I think you're right, there is a point of generation here, so it needs to be contained and managed, but it's not going to be fully subject to regulation until you remove it from this process. So, difficult one. When a facility has equipment. All right, so this is a question asked to EPA. It's in their satellite accumulation guidance document. When it discharges to attached containers, do they collect the container waste have to be in compliance with satellite accumulation regulations? And I looked at that. In other words, is there a POG sometime before when it enters the container? They said yes. Even if it's not regulated under RCRA, the attached containers from the equipment must be in compliance with those regulations. They went on to say that that's the point of generation. I think it's going to depend, when you look at these type of equipment, it's going to depend on how connected your piping is, and is it integral to the process or the manufacturing, or is it just waste accumulation? All right. So something that we wanted to point out, containers that continuously receive liquid waste, like gas chromatographs. This is common, and the containers may have a vent system, which is okay, and the container, though, must be closed to minimize releases. It gets hard. I've seen some of these processes, they try and use the, what's that, stretchy wax paper stuff, or I've seen foil used. I've seen special caps that they've come up with from manufacturers to try and keep the VOCs in there. But John will talk about air emissions later. And then transitioning to Nick here, point of generation, just want to bring up something real quick on P or U listed commercial chemicals. So these are going to be discussed in great detail. If you have a commercial chemical product going to be reclaimed in California, what is the answer? Yes, waste. Surplus material, same as we talked about before. However, retrograde material, which could be something that's not used for economic reasons, could become a recyclable material if it's not reclaimed, reused, turned back to the manufacturer within a year. So some things will get captured there as a waste. All right. Is it hazardous? Here's what the feds say. The commercial chemical becomes a waste instantly when the act of discarding takes place. And then here are some examples of when a POG is. In summary, decisions made to discard it, when it meets the definition due to speculative accumulation, when you don't meet conditions of the retrograde recyclable materials, or when you send it for reclamation. Hazardous material spills can apply the same logic, but it gets very complex. I think there's almost a whole chapter on that in McCoy's book. Yeah.
Question, so on the previous slide, is that after 1 year? Speculative accumulation, is that?
So speculative accumulation has a definition in our regulations, and I'll try and paraphrase it, but It's pretty much you have speculatively accumulated, if you don't recycle, 75% within the calendar year. So whatever you have at the beginning of the calendar year, if you don't recycle 75% of that, then you'd be considered speculatively accumulating. All right. All right, some points I want to bring out. They're a little more in detail in the tag discussion later today, but failure to immediately clean up spills is abandonment and disposal. There is a RCRA online for that, so you have to clean up your spills. There's some good information on that. Point of generation. PU listed residue waste, again, it's going to be hazardous unless it's reused or used for its intended purpose. And it really doesn't matter if it's the soil water within a contained building. You still have waste. All right. F&K, listed residue waste can be captured under the contained in policy when released, and characteristic waste, media hazardous waste as long as it exhibits a characteristic. So this is for your reference for later on if you deal with issues for something in the soil, groundwater, point of generation issues. And then to make it clear, the point of generation can be different for treatment tier determination than it is for counting towards generator status. It can also be different for your land disposal restrictions. The main thing is proper waste classification upstream of your tank or unit. If you're trying to determine your treatment tier, you also need the following information: what goes in, the amount, and the treatment process. And then waste within or exiting unit can be a new POG with a new classification for land disposal restriction. So that would be what you're going to check for in the manifest. For the treatment tier, we talk a lot about this in the tag. Breaks in the system. What is all part of one system? When do you look at new points of generation for treatment tier determination? And pretty much all we can come up with is, while there might be several points of generation within a treatment unit, if you have an enclosed treatment process, we're looking at what goes, when it goes in, what is it? That's where you're making your treatment tier determination. If you have a break in that process, you now have a separate unit, which might be subject to a separate treatment tier. And that, again, POGs could impact your LDRs, and that LDRs is an all-day class. So did leave you a reference material if you want to look at something. This is a situation where something was hazardous for chromium. By the time they got done treating it, it's hazardous for lead. And they basically said, well, even though it wasn't hazardous for lead up front, now it's hazardous for lead. Now you have a new point of generation. You need to manage it as if it's hazardous for lead. All right. All right. So there it is. That's why it's important. Make the waste determination, count towards your generator status. Hazardous waste tank system would be regulated, and LDRs apply from there. Treatment tier. Exiting a process equipment. Points of generation are when it exits manufacturing process, when it's spent and a decision is made to discard it. You can read the slide. Residue exits a unit. Sludge deposited in a waste management unit, or under RCRA when it exits a permit-exempt unit. So even if it's exempt from RCRA permitting, when that residue comes out, you have a point of generation. Lots of references, especially love my McCoy's reference material.